Good morning or good afternoon, or I suppose good evening to some of you that are out there. I have the pleasure of being only having to do the introduction for this wonderful talk. My name is Sandy Chafulias. I am obviously an InCHIP affiliate. I am also one of the PIs on the M3EWB Emotional Wellbeing Network of Network Meetings. This is one of our talks, and we are so delighted that we've been able to secure Janine Simmons to be here with us today. So Janine has a bio that's like multiple pages long, and I'm just going to give a couple paragraphs of an introduction before I turn it over to her to get started. Janine is currently the Deputy Director of the Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research, commonly known as OBSSR. She joined as Deputy Director in January of 2024, but as you'll hear in about a minute, she has a lifetime of dedication to initiatives and work within OBSSR and NIH as a whole. So in her role as Deputy Director, she supports the Director and staff in strategic planning, developing scientific initiatives, ensuring strong communication with internal and external partners, and implementing plans to advance the coordination, integration, and impact of behavioral and social sciences research. She comes to OBSSR by the way of NIMH and NIA. At NIMH, Dr. Simmons ran the Social and Affective Neuroscience program within the Division of Neuroscience and Basic Behavioral Research. She served as a subject matter expert on the social processes for NIMH's Research Domain Criteria Program and originated proposals for the BRAIN initiatives, Brain Behavior Quantification and Synchronization Initiative. At NIA, she served as chief of the Individual Behavioral Processes Branch and served as the program officer or project scientist for NIA's Stress Measurement Network, Emotional Wellbeing Networks, Telomere Research Network, and the Science of Behavior Change Coordinating Center. She's worked on OBSSR-related initiatives for a long time, including, since 2015, the Coordinating Committee's Behavioral Ontology Development Working Group, which I know she likes to talk about, and I hope she'll talk about a little bit today as well. Much more to be said, but I don't want to spend more time. We want to get right into having Dr. Simmons share with us her perspective. So thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to try to share I'm going to press the share button. There we go. Are we seeing that?
Yes, you're good.
Yep, good to go. Okay, there's a little bit of a delay. Perfect. So again, I'm happy to be here, and I appreciate the invitation to participate in this webinar series. I want to give you today an overview of the priorities of NIH's Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research, and talk a little bit about how those priorities intersect with research on emotional well-being. So I'm going to start with an introduction to the world of NIH. Oops. And then I'm going to end a little bit with some tips and tricks for potential NIH applicants. First, I just wanted to let you know, if you don't know, that the National Institutes of Health consists of 27 separate institutes and centers, each of which is its own universe, and each with its own set of program priorities. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to navigate through those 27 institutes to find the right place for your work in the second part of the talk. But for now, I just wanted to orient you to where OBSSR is situated. We are actually one of the offices within the Office of the NIH Director. We interact with and collaborate with all 27 of the other institutes and centers. OBSSR has quite a broad agenda, as you can imagine, and I just wanted to orient you to the way we think about the topics we cover. So in behavioral research, we consider that to cover both observable actions of individuals or groups and mental phenomena such as knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, motivations, perceptions, cognition, and emotions. And so what that means in an emotional well-being context is that you may not think of emotional well-being as a behavior per se. And I was just having a conversation with someone in the Emotional Well-being Network yesterday about this. But our bucket of behavior includes internal states and mental phenomena such as EWB. We also, of course, are interested in social science research, which includes interactions between and among individuals, characteristics, structures, and functions of social groups and institutions across full levels of analysis. We're also interested in the physical, economic, cultural, and policy environments in which social and behavioral phenomena occur. And then I also want to note, again, just in the context of emotional well-being, that we use the WHO definition of health, which refers to a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So I'm proud and pleased that we have released our new strategic plan for the next 5 years. Is going to be guiding everything that we're doing, a bit of orientation to it now. So it includes articulation of OBSSR's vision and mission. We envision the synergistic integration of behavioral and social scientists in health research, leading to accelerated scientific discovery, effective treatment and health promotion interventions, and equitable implementation strategies to improve health for all. We seek to do this with a 4-part mission that's designed to enhance the impact of health-related BSSR by identifying gaps and opportunities in research, by integrating BSSR within the larger NIH research enterprise by working with our partners across those 27 other ICOs. We develop and coordinate initiatives with those other ICOs, and we seek to communicate significant BSSR findings across NIH and beyond. So this is our strategic plan infographic. First, I want to note that we have a cross-cutting theme for everything we do is looked at through the lens of health equity. And health equity in the context of BSSR involves acknowledging and addressing social, economic, and environmental factors that contribute to health disparities and impede health or impede full well-being for all persons. We have a long history as an office of supporting research initiatives that address health disparities, that provide opportunities for underrepresented groups in scientific fields, that seek to improve research inclusivity, and try to make sure we're supporting research that can speak to policy that affects minoritized populations. In addition to this cross-cutting theme, we have 3 broad areas that we have thought about priorities for. I'm going to focus mostly today on research, but we also have workforce capacity building efforts, which I'll talk to you a little bit about. And then we have internal operational processes, which include a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. But I'm not going to talk much more about internal office stuff today. So now I'd like to tell you a little bit more about what's in the research priorities. Again, we've chunked these into 3 buckets. Strategic priority 1 focuses on collaborative science, which includes integrating and coordinating across NIH, building a cumulative BSSR knowledge base, and enhancing and connecting basic to applied BSSR. Strategic priority 2, we're seeking to foster really innovative scientific investigation always. That includes efforts to refine measurement in BSSR, to promote novel experimental designs, and to advance data analytics. Within that space, also is not only advancing data analytics and promoting designs, but also disseminating those skills, tools, knowledge across the workforce as part of our workforce development efforts, which I'll tell you a little bit more about. And then strategic priority 3 focuses on implementation, dissemination, and equitable impact of our research findings. So I'm not going to talk about all these things, but I am going to touch on these starred areas, starting with building a cumulative BSSR knowledge base because Sandy asked for it. So as you may be aware, OBSSR and multiple NIHICs, as well as the National Science Foundation, the American Psychological Association, the Association of Psychological Sciences, and FABS supported a consensus report on ontologies in the behavioral sciences by the National Academies of Science. And that was published in 2022. There's numerous recommendations, and OBSSR took those recommendations really to heart and followed up to promote ontology development and behavioral sciences with 2 notices of funding opportunity. And I'm pleased to note that we did receive a great number of really interesting applications, and we are actually about to launch a new behavioral ontology development network. Much like the emotional well-being network that consists of 4 independent UO1s, each focused on ontology building, but in different areas of behavioral and social sciences. And then in this case, there's a central dissemination and coordination center because all of the projects are going to share infrastructure and computational needs. I want to note in this context that, of course, the Emotional Wellbeing Network early on, with leadership from M3EWB, formed a taxonomy working group and did the really difficult work of coming up with a consensus definition, consensus working definition for emotional well-being, and importantly, beginning a dialogue with the larger research community about this definition through this special issue in affective science, to which, of course, NIH contributed a response. And we're looking forward to having that dialogue continue. Another of our efforts is that we've worked to enhance BSSR terminology in MESH. So MESH is the system that underlies PubMed searches. So MESH data translate whatever you type into the search box in PubMed and uses that information to find, retrieve, return to you publications that are hopefully relevant and interesting. The problem is that BSSR terms are severely underrepresented in MESH. So they represent only 2 to 3% of MESH. And that creates a decrease in the quality of search results. So missing BSSR terms can lead to inaccurate or limited results, which can, of course, reduce or impede the development of a cumulative knowledge base. So OBSSR has been addressing this through a collaboration with the National Library of Medicine and through a lexical intelligence contract through which we have been identifying gaps in BSSR terminology in MESH and suggesting the addition of terms. We've done this in a number of specific areas within the domains you see here, including cognitive, affective, contextual, and behavioral domains so far. We also recently completed and published a formal evaluation of the impact of adding terms, specifically the SDOH terms that we added the impact of adding those terms to MESH on search results. The figure on the right is just showing you that we think the results are very encouraging for improving the results of the search. And we're very interested in having members of the BSSR community continue to think about the possibility of adding terms to MESH, and we're happy to work with folks on that. I wanted to note that MESH includes a very limited terminology related to emotional well-being or well-being in general. Within the terms for infant, child, and adolescent health, there are synonyms that include infant, child, and adolescent well-being, respectively. And then there's one specific term for psychological well-being. And the definition there for psychological well-being is the condition of existence or state of awareness in which psychological needs are satisfied. So when I look at this, I think that there's room for growth, and I'd be happy again to talk to anybody who is interested. One of the projects that Sandy also mentioned that I've been working on and that spans several OBSSR strategic priorities is the Science of Behavior Change Initiative, or SOBC. SOBC started as a Common Fund project, which is an NIH-wide centralized project. It started 15 years ago with these goals. All of the goals are related to behavioral intervention development in support of health outcomes, one of which, of course, we consider well-being, emotional well-being, to be a health outcome. And so the questions here are how to do research to develop behavioral interventions that are principled, applicable, able to be equitably distributed, and so on. And so we have been trying to promote basic research on the initiation, personalization, and maintenance of health behavior change. Wanted to note in this context that in addition to the SOBC efforts, OBSSR has over the last couple of years had a series of large workshops related to behavior change maintenance. And those have been led by Deborah Young-Hyman, and there is a final special issue of a journal article that's being prepared on that, really focusing on maintenance per se. We're also, of course, always interested in promoting multidisciplinary research to understand the basic principles and mechanisms related to behavior and behavior change. And then crucial to SOBC is the development of measures and tools required for such an approach. And these are measures and tools both to measure hypothesized mechanisms or the engagement of targets, but also to measure health outcomes themselves, both proximal and distal. So OBSSR has contributed, as I said, to SOBC, specifically through helping fund the Coordination Center and the development of a behavior measures repository. The repository, of course, aligns with our strategic priority of building a cumulative knowledge base. It also aligns with strategic priority 2 in terms of refining and making available behavioral measurements. And the focus overall of improving behavioral intervention development is, of course, aligned with strategic objective 3. What I wanted to point out most here is that M3EWB did a lot of work to develop a measures repository as part of your emotional well-being project, and that has dovetailed really nicely with SOBC, and we really appreciate the efforts and collaboration and coordination that it's taken to successfully now upload 82 of the EWB measures into the SOBC measures repository, where hopefully they can be extended to a larger audience of investigators. I said I was going to comment a little bit on capacity building and also give you a couple of examples here of programs we run to promote innovative designs, analytics, and approaches. So for more than a decade, OBSSR has supported short courses aimed at cultivating skills crucial to advancing BSSR through innovative methodologies and analytics. You can see there's a wide range of topics. The topics are suggested and put in applications by external investigators, reviewed as such, and then funded by OBSSR. Because we recognize that for any given course, which is usually going to occur for a limited period of time, not everybody can attend. So OBSSR has required that institutions receiving these grants make course materials available to the wider scientific community. I also just want to note that these short courses for people at all stages of career development. OBSSR has also focused on early stage career development. And one example of that is our TDA program, which is Training in Advanced Data and Analysis for BSSR. This is a T32 predoctoral training program launched in 2019 in collaboration with 11 of the NIH ICs. And the goal here is to develop a cohort of specialized predoctoral candidates who can apply advanced data analytics to a complex landscape of BSSR data, and to give those graduate students skills to integrate methods and theory across multiple levels of analysis, and to take those skills further into their career and hopefully subsequently train other people and continue to learn. The TDA program has been running for 5 years. Our 2024 applications are somewhere in the review stage, but people interested either in short course development or in T32 development related to emotional well-being are welcome to look into these programs and consider submitting an application. Strategic priority 3, as I said, focuses on implementation, dissemination, and equitable impact. I just wanted to give you 2 examples of programs that fall within this area. One is our violence research initiatives. OBSSR is responsible for managing a specific congressional appropriation of $12.5 million per year, focused on research for reducing firearms injury and preventing mortality, firearms-related mortality. This relations and seeking to address and reduce firearm injury and mortality prevention at a number of levels, from the individual level up to systemic change. Also, we've created a vibrant research network, again, with a coordinating center that helps disseminate efforts widely and also helps with our workforce capacity building. Also, OBSSR was very early to respond to the COVID pandemic. So as early as April 2020, we published a notice of special interest to highlight that in addition to work on vaccines and understanding the virus, we also had at that time and continue to have a need for social, behavioral, economic, and health communication and epidemiologic research in this area. One of the things the SBE network has done is promote a set of common data elements for data harmonization, focus on digital and community health interventions that might be scalable and deliverable in a variety of contexts. And again, think about health disparities and health equity very closely. And this is an ongoing initiative. So that's my whirlwind tour through OBSSR. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can see our website, follow us through social media. If you'd like to participate more directly, OBSSR has a coordinating committee with representatives from all of the NIHICs. And in addition to that, we have coordinating committee meetings that are open to the public, and those happen 4 times a year on Fridays. And we're happy to disseminate more specific information about those meetings. They're usually quite interesting, often with scientific talks, as well as updates from individuals in the NIH and external community. Tips and tricks for navigating NIH. The first and last thing I will say is that contacting a program officer is very important. And I'm going to say that 6 or 7 more times in the next 5 or 6 slides. So if you remember, NIH consists of 27 separate institutes and centers. That means that each of those has their own strategic plan, their own set of strategic priorities, and they're thinking about funding depending on 2 main components. So one is the scientific merit of any given application, of course, and scientific review takes place in a independent way from the institute's programming, and I'll come back a little bit to how you can write an application, a strong application. In addition to the scientific merit, the institutes also consider what are their strategic and programmatic priorities, and those may change or update from time to time. And the people who are most up to date and informed about those priorities and who run the programs themselves are program officers. So program officers are worth contacting because we have a lot of information and knowledge that we can share about the priorities of our institute and the priorities of our particular branch or program. So just to give you a sense of who we are, because sometimes people feel reluctant to contact us. We're all scientists with specific subject matter expertise. Our goal is to support the overall mission of our particular institute. That includes setting funding priorities, fostering the development of science in particular areas by issuing funding opportunity, notices of funding opportunity, et cetera, but also through facilitating the grant application process for investigators. The reason for this, of course, is that we each want to see coming in the best science and the best scientists, and we can only do that by helping you all to do the best work and navigate the system. And you may have brilliant ideas, but if you can't navigate the system, then we can't get that work funded. And it's tricky to navigate the system. I like to say that it's a sort of completely separate skill. So folks have spent time training to write papers and to do research, and think how long that has taken. Now the process of writing grant applications is kind of a whole separate kind of training, and program officers are here to help with that. So it's always in your best interest to contact a program officer at an individual institute and centers. So the question is, well, how do I find that program officer? So there are a number of resources. NIH has recently updated its grants.nih.gov page, and that's a single landing page from which you can go to an enormous number of very helpful links. And you can see the ones they've highlighted for folks who are new to NIH or who want to learn about the grants process or are interested specifically in training and career development programs. In addition, from the homepage, I recommend taking a look at the NIH-IC profiles and priorities. That will help you understand which institutes fund which kind of work. And then there's also a section on understanding staff roles, which will expand upon what I'm saying here to talk about what scientific review officers and what program officers can do and how those roles are different. You know why. Having said all that, the single best tool for you to identify an institute and a program officer for research is the Reporter, NIH Reporter Matchmaker tool. If you go to NIH Reporter and then click on the Matchmaker tool, what comes up is basically a blank box, and you can upload or type into there a description of your research or a specific draft-specific aims page, and it will return to you a list of already funded NIH projects that relate in a natural language processing way to your aims. And then it will also, from there, you'll be able to see which institutes have funded those projects and also which program officers have been involved in those projects. And so that gives you a really good starting place. When you contact a program officer, I'll just inject this here, you may find when you do this matchmaker or you think about what different institutes are funding, you may find that there are several options and you're not sure which is the best fit. I highly recommend that you reach out to all of the possible individuals and do that in a single email with everybody CC'd. Just saying, I'm trying to understand, here's my specific aims page, here are my research ideas, and I'm trying to identify the best institute and program for me to work with. We all talk to each other across institutes, and we all work closely and collaboratively, and our goals are to find the best home for your research. So if you let all of us know at once, then we can talk to each other internally and return to you the best answer. If you email a bunch of people separately, sometimes that ends up making you run around in circles. The Center for Scientific Review, if we move from program a little bit to review, CSR also has a number of very valuable resources, tutorials, videos, explanations of how review works, and they also have really good descriptions of each of the study sections and then how the study sections relate to each other. So playing around with that can be very helpful because you're going to be identifying or trying to identify a study section separately from trying to identify a program officer. And although program officers can help with information about study sections, you want to do your own due diligence there. The CSR also has a referral tool to help you identify study sections, much like the Matchmaker tool. The assisted referral tool does the same kind of thing, but for study sections. And finally, one unique resource here when you're writing an application is that the National Institutes of Allergies and Infectious Disease actually has example applications and as well as tutorials on their site. And I recommend going there and looking at those resources. You may have to ignore some of the science content, but it helps a lot with thinking about organization and writing and so on. Okay, I wanted to touch a little bit upon the question of when you should contact a program officer. So really the answer to that is initially as early as possible. So when you have an idea for a project or you're developing something and you want to know, hey, is this something NIH might be interested in? And if so, who and where and what would they be interested in? Reach out to a program officer or more than one program officer at that point. Often we find that for understandable reasons, people feel that they need to have polished material before they send that out to someone who's, at least at the beginning, a stranger. But when that happens, that usually is much later in the process. And the program officer at that point usually has much less flexibility, or you have less flexibility in tweaking the proposal. If we see the specific aims page or a description early on, then we can have conversations about how those ideas fit within an institute's priorities, how you could strengthen that fit, and how sort of to move forward in terms of types of application, and what to focus on within the application. We don't review whole applications, but we can provide a lot of advice. So recommend contacting a program officer before you submit an application, and we can help at that point. Once the application is submitted, it goes into the scientific review process, and there's no point in contacting us about that application during that process because we don't know anything and don't have anything to say. And scientific review is, as I said, it's sort of divided from program by a kind of glass wall. After the review, you'll get a score within a day or two, but program officers again, can't talk to you or give you any real information until after a summary statement is released. That's usually 4 to 6 weeks later. But I do recommend contacting your program officer if they don't reach out to you to discuss your summary statement. Often receiving a summary statement can be an emotional experience, and program officers can help bring an objective gaze as well as an experience with lots of different reviews to help you identify what are the major issues and to discuss how and whether you can respond to those. We can also help at that point in the next phase, the next several phases where something goes forward for consideration for funding and is awarded, or perhaps you're developing a resubmission. Okay, so getting down to some nitty-gritty tips about grant writing. The thing you're trying to do when you're writing a grant application is, especially the specific aims page, which is the first thing everybody's going to look at, is you're trying to create a compelling narrative. So you're striving to write clearly, to have the application be readable, and to have the setup for what you're going to do follow a logical path. If a reviewer cannot read the application or understand the application for kind of fundamental, what we call grantsmanship or writing reasons, they won't read it. So clarity and readability are critical. You want to think about your audience. What study section are you submitting this to? You can find out see the roster of reviewers, although you won't know who specifically is going to be assigned to your application. You know that those people will have expertise relevant to your application, but the whole panel may or may not. And so just think about things like acronyms, or very detailed insider knowledge. Make sure that's sort of unpacked a little bit so that the audience can understand what you're saying. Another tip here is to avoid hyperbole. When you're writing, you want to get the reviewers interested and enthusiastic in the work you're doing, but you don't want to overstate because it annoys reviewers, and you're really trying not to annoy reviewers. So this comes down to trying to remove adverbs usually, and also trying to remove kind of large, big picture statements, which I'll come back to. Critical when you're writing the grant and before you start writing is to think about scope. So different grant applications and different types of mechanisms have different lengths and different amounts of money. So for example, an R21 is a small 2-year award, and R01, it can be a much larger 5-year award. Different training and career development grants have different funds for different things. And you want to really think about whether what you're proposing fits within those constraints. because the proposal has to be feasible. If it's not feasible for any reason, reviewers will simply set it aside. So usually what this means for early stage investigators and trainees is that folks are overambitious. You're excited about what you're doing, you're thinking about how your whole career is going forward, and you put too much in the application. And program officers, again, can be very helpful in saying, this thing you've just sent me is 20 years of work, and you're only going to have 5, right? So let's cut it down. It's also important to think about the scope, and scope to be kind of unified so that the aims are integrated, not dependent upon one another, but speaking to the same general question. For your approach, make sure that the experimental designs that you're proposing actually answer the questions that you have said you're going to answer. This sounds ridiculous, but in fact, it's not uncommon for applications to come in with very exciting ideas about gaps in research and things we need to know, but then the experimental design doesn't actually test the hypothesis, and that's a big problem. Ideally, hypotheses are falsifiable, which is very difficult often, but something to strive for. And you always want to include at least in each of your aims or somewhere in the application, address potential pitfalls and alternative approaches. So again, this goes back to feasibility. If there's some things that you're doing, especially that are innovative or tricky, you want to acknowledge that not everything may work. And here are some specific things that might not work, but here's how you can get the research done or get the answers you want or test the questions in a different way if necessary. And some of all of this is about demonstrating to the reviewers that you've really thought through the problems. I want to come back to talk about avoiding hyperbole and when you're talking about the impact of your work. So it's not uncommon for folks to think about the impact of their work as the long-term improvement of health or well-being of the whole world. But those kinds of statements are often not helpful. And what I recommend is that you think about impact as an answer to these kinds of questions. What will we know? What will I know? What will the field know after this project is complete, after I do this aim that we don't know now? So how is the knowledge that I'm learning here going to be able to move the field forward and going to be able to support work that I plan to do in the future? So that's a 5 to 10 year kind of time frame, not a 20 to 100 year time frame. Especially in training career development grants, but really in all grants, you can focus on the kind of tangible near-term goals as a fundamental necessary basis for the longer research program or career that's going to have even more, of course, impact. Just a little bit more granularity on how I think about the specific aims page. This is just the picture that's in my mind, but I think it's helpful, hopefully. So when you start out, it's kind of like a funnel. This is the logical flow piece. You're making an argument or a compelling narrative that has a flow. At the beginning, you're talking very big picture, this is a sentence or two. What's the research gap? What's the important problem? What's the size of the problem? Why do we care? And then what are the critical questions within that area? What are some really critical questions? What do we know that's relevant and what do we not know? And ideally, you can get to a place where you've set up, here's this super important topic. There's some really critical things we need to know. Even within that, there's some even more critical things or specific things we don't know yet. And this project that I'm proposing here is going to help fill that gap. And then you've set up your aims, and the aims ideally should help fill the gap, address what's not known, answer some critical questions, and then you can talk about impact, as I discussed in the last slide. Okay, so my final thoughts on grant writing tips and tricks are: you want to be thinking and writing with interest and enthusiasm, belief in the impact of your work, because the reviewers will pick up on that, and your enthusiasm will generate their enthusiasm. Within that, however, you need to make sure you've managed the scope so that the project is feasible, and you need to write clearly. It's often helpful to have someone else read the full grant application, even someone who's not in your field at all, because they can often point out places where things just don't make sense before you submit the application. And then bottom line, contact a program officer, and feel free to contact me if you have questions in the future. So I will stop there. Hopefully I'm within a reasonable amount of time.
Actually, you were perfectly spot on.
Great.
So I don't see any questions in the chat. I know I have some, but I'm going to open to the floor first to get your questions answered, because we don't often have this much attention dedicated, right, to answering these questions. You feel free to unmute yourself or put in the chat, and we'll give it a good couple seconds before I ask my first question. Oh, yes, Josh is saying you can now unmute yourself if you would like to ask your question. I'll go ahead and kick us off then. I was curious if you could tell us a little bit more about since it's 2 days off or only about a week off the presses. I haven't read the strategic plan yet for OBSSR, fair enough, right?
Yeah, shocking.
You could talk a little bit about just very quickly, the overview of the process of setting those priorities, but then what happens next? Do all of the ICs then work to align their plans somehow? Like, how does it work in the big wheel to make everything fit together?
Yeah. So the process of creating the strategic plan this time around, okay, so there are consistent things about why the office was established and what our overall goals are, of course, which, I mean, essentially the message we're trying to send as an office and promote and facilitate and is that behavioral and social sciences and behavioral and social science research are as critical, if not more critical, to health and well-being than biological research. And this isn't a criticism of the biological research, but often there's something left out, right? So, COVID is this great example of we can do, amazingly quick, high quality work on the virus and vaccine, like really incredible. But if people aren't going to believe that there's a virus or take the vaccine or have access to it, all of which are kind of behavioral and social science questions, then it doesn't make a difference. And another example is just so many risks to health are behavioral risks, like smoking and drinking and those kinds of things carry huge risks for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, et cetera. And we can give the medications for those, but again, there are issues of access, price, willingness to take, ability to maintain. And so if we could get in there and focus on improving health behaviors, maybe we could have an impact. Having said that, it's very, very difficult to change people's behavior. So that's the really big picture. Then within that, the research capacity and operational piece is kind of a standard way in which all NIH strategic plans are being developed. Within those sections, OBSSR, I think that one of the key things we do that and can do that other institutes don't do as much is the focus on measurement, methodology, experimental design, and also a focus on infrastructure. So all the other institutes are not necessarily aligning their strategic plans with ours. We're trying to say, in the context of your goals, the health outcomes in which you're interested in, or the basic research questions you're asking, to what extent should behavioral and social science research be included, and how can we help you include that? But
Okay.
they're often not going to be funding kind of infrastructure. Like if what is needed is some kind of infrastructure, right, to grow a field like the Emotional Wellbeing Network, that's something OBSSR has more flexibility in doing. Sorry, that was long-winded and maybe I didn't answer the whole question.
No, I think you did it does make sense. And of course, the question that I have in the background is what's next for EWB?
Yeah.
What's optimistic or excited about with your new networks around ontological development?
Yeah, so I also want to say, so in terms of the what's next, just a little bit more generally, of course, we have a new director of OBS, which I probably said at the beginning. We have a new director of OBSSR, James Money, and so some of the interest in, and she's a clinical psychologist with background in HIV, and so she's very interested in dissemination and implementation side of things. So I think the office is going to be moving a little bit more in that direction than it has in the past. I'm, of course, as the deputy director, we're kind of a team where I'm more on the basic behavioral science side, and so basic as to get down to we can't study anything until we have a definition of what we're studying. I'm really excited in that for the network. I kind of am thinking of it as proof of principle. So the principle is if we can have definitions and defined relationships between concepts and tags that are defined for data, for huge data sets, then we'll be able to more quickly build upon the work that other people are doing. So it's like this is a core bridge, or think of it, or piece of infrastructure that if everybody contributes to or tags into, that will just make everything kind of easier, because you'll be able to more easily see what's known about something and what's not known about something, and also be more easily able to do secondary analyses, especially on huge data sets.
That's true. I think it's going to also enhance the goal toward increasing collaboration and cross-disciplinary collaboration. I mean,
right, yeah, and I should say that that each of the networks was required to have subject matter experts and ontology development building experts. What we've found over a long time is that you basically can't do it at all without both of those groups, and those are not in the behavioral and social sciences. They're not talking to each other yet. So I know for sure from Emotional Wellbeing Network and the Stress Measurement Network that if you set this up, they will start talking to each other. And if nothing else, those relationships will emerge and be productive.
Some of the hardest thing, and I don't know if you remember, but I came to one of the very first talks on the presentation that committee members had done when the report was first released. And I don't remember his name, but it was a social psychologist talking about how he didn't believe it. This was important when he first got started, but he got to a line where he says, "Can I live with it?" And I keep using that over and over again in different teams that I'm in now, because people don't want to let go of their nuanced way of defining something or how they see something. And I say, okay, but can we live with this? So I just keep saying that over and over again.
Right. Yeah, it's really, it's really difficult. And I think perhaps we started with the term ontology, and maybe there are lots of other terms you could use that might be more accessible. So sometimes I think about it as, it's essentially a knowledge representation or a knowledge graph. or, you know, we're talking about definitions, taxonomies, relationships. I mean, the other thing that is that really the whole goal of the whole thing for me in some ways has been to have a clear sense of what behaviors or behavioral constructs are measured by which types of measures. And if you have an ontological framework allows you to have that relationship where it says is measured by. And that's what connects to the SOBC for me and SOBC's efforts also in ontology, related to ontology development. Because I think that if you're starting out in a field, or even if you come into it from a new direction, you think, huh, that's interesting. I wonder how I should study that, right? You know, and then there's a dictionary for you to look that up.
Right. It's very helpful. It gets you 5 steps ahead, I think. But I've been hogging. I do, but I've always thought that, and since we started in this EWB network, and I understood how many different players were coming to the table with perspectives. I know I've just now hogged, I think, all of the question time. So I want to see, we have just 2 minutes left technically in our time. So let's see if someone else has a question for Dr. Simmons. Or if you're just enjoying our conversation, which is great too. I definitely appreciated your advice on first of all, acknowledging that it can be very difficult to navigate all of the NIH structures and understand where to go. And I had never thought really about including everyone on the same email. I always individually email. Maybe that's a better way to do it.
Well, that's just my advice.
Yeah.
I've just seen this happen where then, you know, you send it to me, I'm at NIMH, and I say, well, really, this should be an NINDS. And then you sent something to the NINDS person, and they're like, well, no, it should be NIMH. And you're like, well, I just got this response from Janine that said it's not. We can have all those conversations. And I think people maybe conceptualize, as I said, they're all separate institutes and separate worlds, but we all share this larger mission. And that includes sharing this goal of having people find a home for their research. So we're not competing against each other. We're, you know, nothing's a secret.
Like an ontology, right?
That's right.
Okay, well, I believe we're just about at time. So I want to thank InCHIP, first of all, for sponsoring these lecture series. I know I learn a lot as I come and hear from speakers from all over the world in places that I maybe not have the opportunity to be part of. Certainly thank NIH for funding the EWB networks that are allowing us to have done the work that we have done and bring people like Dr. Simmons here as part of this lecture series. And most importantly, thanks to Dr. Simmons for giving us a bit of her time, because we know how busy she certainly is. And thank you, Melanie and Josh, for keeping us on track here today.
Yes, appreciate everything, and great to see you and talk with you.
Yes, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much, everyone. And I think Melanie always does some type of follow-up finish in email, maybe on who the next speaker is going to be. You'll see it come. But thank you. Have a great day.